So, over the course of the history of this show, I think I've mentioned several times that I think Panini is using leftover pieces from their game dated jerseys and their finals jerseys. I think they're putting them in just run-of-the-mill regular relic cards. And I understand this is probably a necessity in some cases, but I also think disclosing that information could add a lot of value to their products, and that's really both monetary and sentimental value. With that being said, though, prior to the last couple weeks, I couldn't really prove that any of these relics were ending up elsewhere. There were just a lot of clues along the way that indicated they were, and it made a lot of sense. But the discovery I'm going to talk about today specifically involves leftover NBA Finals pieces. I found where some of them were at. But before I get too far in, I suppose it makes sense for me to give a quick rundown of the places we know for sure those pieces already are. In years past, finals jerseys were primarily used in just a couple of standard Panini sets. There were booklets that started in 2013 Preferred that included a plain swatch version numbered to 99 and a prime version out of 25, which originally included the chopped up nameplate pieces. And then on top of that, there was a Super Prime Finals logo man numbered 1 of 1. Unfortunately, the Prime booklet print runs were drastically reduced starting in 2016. And when I say that, there might have still been the same number of players, but instead of 25 copies, a lot of them were much lower. And that carried over into the next year when the booklets moved to Opulence, and then continued until their final iteration there in 2019. A couple other notes real quick about the Opulence booklets. The regular jersey versions went away. Keep in mind, we used to have 99 of them for most players, so that's a lot of fabric because these were jumbo pieces. And then the last 2 years of Opulence, those booklets added a sponsor patch and a Nike swoosh variation as well. So we lost all the regular swatches and we gained a couple of prime swatches, although the print runs for the others were still pretty low. In addition to the booklets, there was one other major final set that I can't leave out. Earlier, I mentioned that the nameplate pieces were often cut up and included in those preferred booklets. Well, starting in 2015, the nameplates could be found in National Treasures instead, where each letter had its own individual card. And they stayed there until we got our last official batch of finals nameplates in 2019. Other than those two sets, the only other labeled finals pieces we've got have come from promotional sets like Black Friday. Believe it or not, yes, they did used to put some final stuff in there. Or one of the handful of game-dated sets from Court Kings, Innovation, and Immaculate. Sometimes they slip those in there, but that's it. And we haven't even seen many of those sets lately, of the game-dated sets, save for the new Game Night jersey set that was included in 2022 Noir. And I'll have more on that set shortly, as it played a pretty important role in what I'm about to talk about. So anyway, one of my favorite players in the league is Kawhi Leonard, and he's no stranger to NBA Finals sets. I particularly enjoyed his 2019 Finals run with the Raptors. I don't think people realize how significant it is for someone to win Finals MVP with two different teams. Right now, that list is just him and LeBron and Kareem. And while it's probably not likely, I won't rule out the possibility that Kawhi could do it with a third team too, and that list right now is just LeBron. But anyway, as of right now, that 2019 MVP was Kawhi's last. And seeing as I collect finals relics, I wanted to pick up a Kawhi to commemorate the occasion. The only problem was there just wasn't a lot of final stuff out there. His Opulence Prime booklet was numbered to 9, and some of those copies were trim pieces, which I found it strange that Panini barely made any for him, and they didn't even use the best pieces. So, where were these pieces going? In addition to that, I should also mention he had a Nike logo 101, a Logo Man 101, a sponsor patch 101, and then the National Treasures cards for every letter in his last name. So if you're keeping count, that's 19 Kawhi Finals cards total at that point prior to Noir. And more than half of them are essentially 101s. I know the nameplates are technically numbered to 7, but they're all unique. As it turns out, Raptors collectors are very competitive, and that might even be an understatement. So I never had a shot at one, and that's probably for the better because they need to be able to commemorate their title too, so that's fine. But this whole scenario got me thinking, Kawhi was only with the Raptors for one season. For at least half of that season, Panini was still using some of his old Spurs relics. And then even when they did acquire their first Raptors jersey for him, it was black, whereas the finals one they had was white. And I should also add there was a white jersey Nike swoosh in 2018 Immaculate. So at a bare minimum, they had 3 Kawhi Raptors jerseys total. Okay, keep in mind that's just minimum, so there could have been more. Now, I know it's not like the old days where a single jersey can make up to 2,000 pieces. That's a number that we used to see in Beckett Magazine, but the relics are a lot larger now. At the same time, though, they barely used in any of the official finals cards. So if there's a white Kawhi Raptors relic, I'm thinking, hey, there's about a 50-50 chance it could be finals worn. So I had this thought in the back of my mind, and I waited. I thought, hey, there's an early 2019 Clippers card that features white Raptors pieces. I think it's in Crown Royale. But I was hoping for something better. I figured there would be more because in the meantime, we learned that Panini would be losing its NBA license, which means it would probably liquidate relics on the way out. So I felt pretty confident more Kawhi final stuff would be coming, regardless if it was actually labeled or not. And if it did, it would be a major challenge for me to figure it out. But that one was, a challenge that I was interested in pursuing nonetheless. Fast forward 3 years. Yes, that's right. I waited 3 years for this. 2022-23 Select had a nice jumbo relic set called Throwback Memorabilia, and that's a set that they have every year, so that was nothing new. But for the first time, Kawhi was in it as a Raptor, with a hodgepodge of old Raptors pieces. There were solid white pieces, there were porous white pieces, there were black pieces. It had it all, except for chunky patch pieces, which I hoped to try to photo match to Game 2 of the finals using Getty Images. That's right, Kawhi was not in the prime gold version of this card numbered to 10. Of course not. So Kawhi's only actual patch was the 101 black version, but who knew when that would surface? I was keeping an eye out for it, but, who knew? So this got me brainstorming other possible routes. Could I find someone maybe at Panini to help me out? Well, you know the answer to that. It's not likely. It's not going to happen. Could I hope to find a version with distinct stitching? Maybe, but it probably wouldn't matter now that we're in the Nike era because everything is just so cookie cutter now. So while I'm brainstorming and thinking, what can I do here? I grabbed 3 of these white relics, figuring I might need to have some in hand to test out future theories down the road. And why not? They were like $10 a piece. At worst, it just meant that I added 3 championship season relics to my PC for $30, so I wasn't going to complain about that. So I had these relics in hand, and I continued to think, and I remembered something I've used sparingly for other relic cards in the past. Now, I've kind of danced around this information on here before, but when Panini preps a jersey to be cut up, they adhere it to a giant label that has the player's name and a 6-digit number printed on there repeatedly, and it covers the whole piece. It's probably in 10 or 11 fonts, so it's pretty small. And in some cases, they also list the color of the relic, so it might say, Steven Adams red or whatever. But I haven't found that to be as common. And if you've ever seen the Pete Maravich jersey video that Panini has up on its YouTube, you can kind of see where all this stuff is printed on. There's also a Tom Brady video where it might be even easier to see. And at some point in the past, I ended up with a damaged Steven Adams relic here at the house. So I thought, what, this thing is already damaged. Let's just sacrifice this thing for the good of knowledge. So I decided to cut the piece out so I could see that typed font for myself. And there it was, Steven Adams 216496, over and over, Steven Adams 216496, and so on. And you're probably wondering, what does a player's name and a random number prove anyway? And that's a good question. The name just confirms it's actually the right player. So with this Kawhi relic, if I were to get a name, that doesn't mean much. It's just saying, hey, yes, this was a Kawhi Leonard jersey. They should all have his name on there. But from all the cases I had looked at, I was pretty sure each 6-digit number corresponded to a specific jersey, and that jersey only. And that was actually the last piece of info I needed to confirm before I released all of this information today. I wanted to make sure that all of my I's were dotted and my T's were crossed. So I reached out to one of my contacts in the industry and he confirmed for me. He said, yes, correct. It is unique to each individual piece of memorabilia. So if that's the case, in theory, I should be able to get the 6-digit number from one of Kawhi's 19 known finals cards and match it up with the same 6-digit number in another card if those relics are actually out there. So once again, you're probably wondering, well, how do you do that without tearing these things up? Because you just tore up that Steven Adams relic to get that number in the first place. Well, there is a trick. And it's easier on some cards than others, but if you take a very bright flashlight and press it against the cloth of the card from the front, in some cases that number will show through on the back. Now, it just varies on how thick the card is, if the back is black, if the back is white, if the jersey's white. There are a number of factors that are at play here, but the thinner the relic is, the more likely you are to pull this off. And even then, it takes a bit of work because it's not always easy to read. Well, my original plan was to try and find one of these Kawhi Finals booklets at the National and sort of sweet talk a dealer into letting me try the flashlight trick out. And I can only imagine how that would have went down. Thankfully, I only get to imagine because I never even found one. That wasn't going to stop me, though. So I went home, I took out the 3 select relics I had, I took out my flashlight, and I decided, okay, I'm still going to see what these codes are so I can have them ready. And between the 3 relics, I ended up with 2 different codes, 261606 and 285368. And I thought, once again, I should have these ready in case I find maybe the right Kawhi collector online to try it for me. So the first week of August, I reached out to one who owned an Opulence booklet. He tried several times, but he wasn't able to get anything to show through on the other side. And the whole thing was starting to look like a dead end, but I wasn't going to give up. However, work started back up again, and I had no choice but to shelf the project and hope that more info would reveal itself later on. And it did, about 2.5 months later. For starters, the Select 1-of-1 patch showed up on eBay. Now, that didn't necessarily give me the new info, and I certainly wasn't going to reach out to the eBay seller and ask them to shine a flashlight through the patch, but it meant the card was at least in circulation now. I mean, maybe one of these passionate Raptors fans would buy it, and I would have a chance to reach out to them later on down the road. And then the second big thing was the release of the new Noir. I noticed there was a game-dated jersey set in there. I also noticed that Kawhi was listed on the checklist as a Raptor, so I had a suspicion it was more final stuff, and once I saw the first copy, I realized I was right. He had 49 copies of a plain relic, 5 copies of a prime relic, and 1 tag piece, so that's 55 more Kawhi Finals cards to add to the pool, but also another spot to try and get that 6-digit code from. And I felt like I was pretty early jumping in on this information. Anyway, not long after, people caught on to these final relics, and the first 2 prime versions showed up, and they went for insane prices. And now some of the plain versions numbered to 49 have sold for astronomical prices too. So the odds of me getting one of those to study for this project, well, we'll just say they weren't looking good. But then there was another twist to the story. About a month ago, a collector named Matt reached out to me and asked me something to the effect of, have you ever matched a patch to a specific game? Which, as you guys know, yes, that's something I do for fun. And he sends me a picture of this Kawhi Select Throwback 1-of-1 patch, along with one of the 5 prime copies of the Finals card from Noir. And he was wondering if the Select was also from a Finals jersey. And at first, I kind of gave him a generic answer. I said, well, you'll need to pull up Game 2 pictures on Getty and see if you can match holes or threads or anything like that. I was a little hesitant to go down the flashlight route because this was a theory I was working with, and I wanted to see it through to the end. I wanted to find out if this was actually correct or not. But I finally decided, you know what, I might as well share this information with him. Hopefully he can kind of keep it between us for the time being and we can figure this thing out together. And that ended up being the right choice because he then sent me a picture of an Opulence booklet and an Immaculate swoosh that he owned too. And if I could get him to give me those codes, it could help make things ironclad for me because the code on the Opulence and the Noir should both be the same, while the Immaculate should not. because the final swoosh was used in the opulence booklets. And then we had to worry about matching it to other relics after that. But these were a lot of key pieces that could come into place for this. So I went about explaining my theory to him and the process as a whole. We messaged back and forth for the better part of probably 5 or 6 hours. And once we got him a little better flashlight, we had all the pieces to make this a success. And I was kind of coaching him on what he needed to do. And it made for a fun little project. So kudos to Matt. He was a great sport about the whole thing. I'll start with the easiest piece, which was the Immaculate Swoosh. Like I said, that should not have been finals worn. So whatever code was on that, we were hoping was not the same as the code in these select cards. Well, the code that was on that one was 261606, which matched one of the 3 select relics I had here at the house. So I could rule that one out. I knew that wasn't a finals relic. The Noir card, which was a finals relic for sure, read 285368, which matched the other 2 select relics I owned. So I felt pretty good about that. We still needed to look at the opulence though. And the opulence was a little tricky because the backing was a lot thicker. So Matt had to shine it through the other side, and then we had to reverse the image so we could read the code correctly. Quite the process here, and it was pretty blurry at first, but eventually we figured out it said 285368 as well. And that, to me, confirmed what I wanted to know. The 285 pieces were from a finals jersey, and the 261 pieces were not. And the cherry on the top would be if I could get the code from the NT nameplates, which should be 285 as well, which we haven't got to that point yet. Maybe someone will be able to show me that once this information is released to the public. Nonetheless, there was one more piece of this puzzle, for Matt at least, and that was seeing if the code on his select 1 of 1 matched up with that 285 number. This involved one more round with the flashlight, and when all was said and done, we had another match. And everyone lived happily ever after, now that they knew they had Kawhi Leonard finals pieces.